Hello. Okay, this audio supplement is entitled When They Tell You Go Back to Your Country, a very important audio podcast right now, very pertinent, very relative. Wrote this in 2015, yet I still feel that it is very apropos, it's very germane, and we can use it right now. Let's jump into it. First things first, if people cannot share this earth as a cohesive community of human beings, then, okay. How many of you are tired of this elitist, right-wing, xenophobic, Tea Party type rhetoric? I've grown sick and tired of hearing phrases like, let's take back our country, quote unquote. Go back to your own country, quote unquote. I yearn for the good old times, quote unquote. Let the record be clear. America was not European. This is a country of stolen land. Let's be clear. This land was already occupied and inhabited by a civilization of natives prior to European illegal immigrants. Let's talk about the rape and the pillage of Africa by European nations. The European track record is replete. It speaks for itself historically. Europeans came to South Africa and killed off the Zulus with high-powered, sophisticated weaponry. And their descendants currently enjoy the riches and the spoils of stolen property in South Africa. The Belgians are responsible for going into the Congo and killing over 10 million Africans, stripping them of their rubber, their diamonds, their gold and oil and ivory under the auspices of King Leopold II. The Germans are responsible for invading multiple countries in Southwest and Southeast Africa. The Italians are responsible for trying to invade and colonize Northeast Africa and failed miserably at trying to conquer Ethiopia in the Battle of Adwa. Europeans from England, under the auspices of Queen Victoria, invaded and usurped power from India by proxy of the British East Indian Company. The English also sought to rob China of their trade power by undermining China's economy by manipulating the opium supply and starting the Opium Wars. Let's talk about the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference of 1884. The Berlin Conference of 1884. It was a conference in which multiple European nations devised strategies and plans on how to exert imperialistic power, control, and colonize the Congo and many other countries in Africa. The French were responsible for invading and colonizing Mali, Africa, and controlling the Sudan. During the late 19th century and into the first quarter of the 20th century, Britain tried to defeat Somalia 4 times and enlisted the support of Italy to overcome Somalia and portions of Somalia's coastal region. It was the French that invaded and penetrated Guinea, Africa in the late 1800s and usurped control. The British were responsible for infiltrating and colonizing Sierra Leone from the early 1800s to the mid-1900s. It was Britain, Sweden, Portugal, the Netherlands, Germany, and the Norwegians that infiltrated Ghana for centuries under an unassuming engagement of gold trading, quote unquote. However, Britain ultimately gained control until the mid-1900s when Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana became the first African prime minister of the country and called for Ghana to have a self-governing power. Tanzania was scouted by a Portugal explorer that we know as Vasco da Gama in the late 1400s. Portugal then controlled Tanzania up until the late 1600s, almost 2 centuries. The pillage of the African continent can go on for months in a sophisticated and intricate lecture series or symposiums, but let's move on. The aforementioned was pertinent because many of the descendants of the European countries that colonized many countries in Africa traveled and immigrated to America. And they are telling people of color to go back to where we came from. Yet it's their predecessors that have traveled the globe and pillaged country after country after country after country for their resources and claims. Let's talk about the Caribbean colonization cartel. The Caribbean, or the Caribbean, however you would like to call it, it's chock full of islands with indigenous natives that were victims of European imperialism and colonization, from Haiti with the French, Jamaica with Britain, Barbados with Spain, Portugal, and Britain, Guyana with the Dutch and British rule, Trinidad with the Spanish and the French, Tobago with Britain, France, and the Dutch. Once again, the litany of colonization, imperialism, and rule from Europe over the globe is ever present. When they tell you, go back to the country in which you came from, you tell them to go back to Europe and restore all the goods, all of the resources, all the products, all the commodities, all the minerals, all the oil, all the metals that they have stolen globally from country to country. You tell the predecessors and you tell the descendants that you are living off of the generated interest of stolen land, from abuse, from rape, from genocide, from torture, the use of high-powered, sophisticated weaponry to subjugate and murder people. Let's go into the Americas. The United States speaks for itself. We are familiar with the invasion, influx, immigration, infiltration, and the usurping of land and resources by European explorers and invaders. We are pretty familiar with the Indian Removal Act, which was authorized by Andrew Jackson. It forced Indian tribes off their land at gunpoint by U.S. military, resulting in the Trail of Tears and many other unspoken stories of natives. An Indian was a name given to the indigenous people that were here. So not only is it the theft of land and resources, it's also the naming. It is the forced nomenclature imposed on people as you take power from them. So when the present day descendants, the descendants of European ancestors, start telling people to go back to their country, you tell them to kick rocks. These lands were inhabited before their curiosity and thirst for power was even considered. When Tea Partiers say they want to take the country back and they yearn for the good old days, you tell them to kick rocks. Their good old days was hell for everyone else. Their good old days was hell for everyone else. No, we are not interested in your good old days. We're not interested in working your cotton, rice, tobacco, corn, and sugarcane fields. No, we are not interested in your Jim Crow policies. We're not interested in your slave codes. We are not interested in your sharecropping, your sundown towns, your convict leasing, your system of peonage, your second-class citizenship. We are not interested in these games and systems that you set about on the globe. We are all global citizens. Let's talk about the 3 M's of European imperialism. The 3 M's. The 3 M's of European imperialism that has yielded vast riches, fortune, and generational wealth are: number 1, missionary; number 2, mercenary; and number 3, mercantilism. First, they sent their missionaries as a facade of peace, goodwill, and salvation. Once the missionaries established contact and established an agreeable relationship, they then sent in their mercenaries to kill and pillage the prior occupying inhabitants. Lastly, they established the mercantilism to fortify the trade industries, exploit and extract minerals and land and spices and metals and rubber and oil and diamonds and timber and more. The extracted wealth was then transferred generation to generation. Over time, the last names for some have been switched. They've been sanitized for the convenience of historical innocence. Listen to what I said. Over time, the last names for some of these barons, these so-called moguls and titans of trade and exploit, the last names have been switched or they've been sanitized for the convenience of historical innocence. So if these individuals can't peacefully, if they cannot peacefully exist on this globe and share the resources harmoniously among all inhabitants on Earth and stop hoarding the planet's gifts, I predict there will be a global conflict of unimaginable proportion because we are now at a boiling point between the haves and the have-nots. So this concludes. When they tell you go back to your country, you tell them whatever it is that's on your mind. I just gave you the information